All right, joining us to review what has been a difficult week, I think, in some ways, and I guess, from a polling point of view. But as Greg O'Connor has reminded us this morning, a week's a long time in politics, and we've still got 10 to go. 7 to go. 10 weeks to go. Is Ingrid Leary, our Labour MP for Tairi. Yeah, it is. Is that the philosophy? A week is a long time in politics, Ingrid?
It certainly is, as you know.
Yeah.
Anything can change.
Yeah. You looked at the polls this week; they weren't good. Did that have any galvanising effect, or are you expecting to see those after the events of the week previous?
Oh, look, I think after the events of the week previous, we're not surprised. There's been a number of issues, internal issues. So people looking at us being internally focused rather than on them was the perception, even though they were quite isolated incidents. We're through those now, and I think the fact that there are some people who the polls have looked worse for than others, everybody is gearing up to try and get this party vote, get us over the line, support our leader who we know is trusted by New Zealand. Nobody has gone and done anything stupid or said anything stupid. That shows a united team and a united caucus. And as long as we remain united, I think we've got this.
Okay, all right. Good on you for your optimism. Having said that, there'll be about a third of your caucus even with the wind behind you, and if you as I said, if you repeated that 2017 vote, you wouldn't be too upset. That will be thinking, particularly after the list has come out, I'm probably not going to be there anymore. How do you think they'll be feeling?
I can't speak for other people. What I do know is that all of us are focused on getting that party vote up so that people who are looking less secure can get over the line. And that's really important for our community because, they're serving the communities that need a left-leaning government, and we're really motivated. Despite what people say about the polls, actually they can be a really motivating factor. And Greg O'Connor said a week's a long time in politics, and and I know the only poll that counts is the one in October.
Oh, yes. The other thing, though, is that, and I asked that question earlier this week, about whether or not the media have turned. There comes a time, and you know it as well as I do, Ingrid, at which you think the media have already decided who's going to win the election and start to slant their news that way. Do you think that stage has been reached at the moment?
I think we all have our bias and we see media through our bias. You said on our chat last week you felt the media leans towards the left. I feel it leans towards the right. So from my perspective, that bias has been with us in government. But if I go back to 2017, 6 weeks out from the election, the media certainly looked like it had turned and the polls were extremely low. At that point, there was the Jacinda factor and everything changed. So, it does feel like the media has not been our friend for the whole term, the mainstream media. Having said that, I'm pleased to see Radio New Zealand pointing out it's a little bit like financial forecasting. The forecasts are built on the information at the time and are a snapshot. That's what polls are. They shouldn't be taken as being a predictor. I also do think that the polls have an influence on how people think, and so having poll after poll after poll is an interesting thing because, I'd love to see some studies to show what effect polls actually have on polling day. What I do know about left-leaning voters, Labour voters, certainly voters in my constituency, they're smart, they have their ear to the ground, they don't necessarily follow the media, they converse with their friends, they look at what their local MP's done, they look at their back pocket and what's happening with the cost of living and whether they're getting targeted support, and they make their decisions on that. And they also have long memories, particularly in my electorate. So when they hear empty promises about the hospital or other things coming from other parties, they kind of take it with a grain of salt. So I feel confident that voters are smart and will not necessarily look at the polls as how they're going to vote. They will vote, with the information influencing their lives.
Yeah, it's a good fair point you make about the polls, because there's been a great deal of international studies done on whether or not the polls are predictive. or whether or not they are influential in terms of making votes. And there's a fair bit of evidence. I remember Winston Peters always wanted polls banned 3 months before elections on the basis that they did have an influence on the way in which people voted. You obviously have some sympathy for that viewpoint.
I do. Just as I do believe media framing also has quite a bearing on things. So it's a different world we live in now with those factors compared to, before the internet, before the year 2000. And when I was a journalism lecturer at the University of the South Pacific, one of the things I was really keen for my budding journalists to understand was their role in shaping society, that when we look at the fourth estate, it's not about reflecting an objective reality. Every voice and every story has an influence in helping to shape, and so taking a responsible approach is important.
That's an interesting concept that you've got there. So did you teach your students, and are you of the view that journalists should be agents for social and change, or that they should simply relay the facts and let other people make up their minds from there?
I think it's a mixture of both. I think it's good to have straight factual reporting. We live in an age where there is editorialising, and so just recognising the bias and being transparent about that, I think, is the best we can hope for. So it's recognising that however they report, even the things they choose to report on, has an influence on society. I'm not saying they should be advocate journalists, but, choosing to report on something trivial, like what someone looks like, or, something that seems relatively trivial in my view versus, say, a policy, those choices are going to have an influence on the information people have.
Well, can I take... I'm only interested in developing this idea because your local newspaper, for example, is the Otago Daily Times. Now, you've already mentioned the issue of the Dunedin Hospital, which may or may not prove pivotal in the voting decisions of individuals in your wider area, including your electorate. Now, they've taken a particular stance on the hospital, and have very editorially taken a view that basically Dunedin's being stiffed, if I could, by certain decisions in recent months. How do you respond when a journalism's to do that? Do you think that's unfair?
I think the fairest way for them to do that is to declare their bias, and to some degree they have, because the City Council passed a resolution to spend ratepayer money educating for the hospital, and one of the beneficiaries of that, I believe, was the Otago Daily Times. So they had a special little banner that said this was part of that campaign. Nevertheless, it does have an impact. I believe every person that has sent me a postcard about the information on the hospital changes, I have responded to with a letter outlining what the facts are. So that's the best we can do in this environment.
But again, it's the old story, isn't it? You've got a media that was probably the most influential in your neck of the woods that's taken a stance on an issue that's opposed to where your party is, and you won't be the first for this to happen, irrespective of party stripe.
That's right, and a particular spin on it, and highlighting particular elements of it which are perhaps misleading or just nuanced in a certain way that don't actually look at clinical outcomes, for example. So it's been important for me to use my voice to be able to provide people with the facts. In some ways, it's unfortunate, and I do believe actually that the communication from Te Whatu Ora could have been much better on this. I think we can't blame the Otago Daily Times. There was a communication black hole for a period of time that they filled, and as a local MP that was, concerning, and I did my best, as did other Labour members down here, to try and make sure people were armed with the facts so they could make informed choices. We're still going through that process, but the council are now happy with where we've landed, and when I speak to constituents, they seem to be more open-minded. They can see the hospital coming up. They can see, we've got steel beams going in a few weeks. So they're starting to see real progress, and they also remember that there was a lot of talk about building a hospital from National and it never happened. So we're getting there.
Okay. Now, the other big story of this week, or the last week really, has been that Labour are going to release a tax policy. How far is that away from the election?
I think the manifesto's imminent, so I can't give away anything that's in that, but I'm really excited about it because I think people will see more targeting of household support, more recognition that people are really doing it tough and that we're focused on supporting Kiwi households.
Which raises, obviously, the next question as to whether or not GST is going to be on fresh fruit and vegetables. Is that something that you expect an announcement on in that manifesto?
I'm not going to give anything away, and I'm not suggesting that I'm going to say what I think is going to be in there. I do know that we're focused on Kiwi households, and I expect all of our announcements to be on, or most of them, to be on supporting Kiwi households through this really difficult time.
All right, well, I'll ask you personally then, do you think that removing the GST on fresh fruit and vegetables is a good idea?
I think that anything that takes pressure off households at the moment is a good idea. I have always been open about supporting a capital gains tax and a wealth tax. Now's not the right time for that. The leader has made a captain's call on that. I continue to support a wealth tax and a capital gains tax for when it is the right time to do that. He's made it clear it won't be during his term in office, and I absolutely accept that. But for me, I would like to see a wealth tax or a capital gains tax at some point. I think New Zealand wants that. Now is not the right time, and I fully support that decision.
Okay, but that's not the question I asked. Do you personally support GST being removed from fresh fruit and vegetables? Would that make a difference to your constituents, Ingrid, particularly in Dunedin South and Milton and Balclutha?
I think anything that takes the pressure off households does, and as long as it's implemented correctly, I think it would make a real difference to my constituents.
So that's a yes, is it?
As long as it's implemented correctly, as long as we make sure that the benefit of it goes to constituents and not to the supermarkets, then absolutely, and that's around how it's managed. And also, as you're aware, we've got new rules in place for supermarkets anyway that I think should manage that.
Okay, because that's always been the argument, hasn't it, that if you removed the GST from such, the supermarkets would simply see it as a red letter day for them and be able to, over time, incrementally increase their profits. You're saying if they could be stopped from doing that, that would be a good thing.
Yes, and the supermarkets have got a close eye on them at the moment. They're fully aware of that. We've got a new groceries commissioner. We've got the new Act in place. We've got standards coming in. I think that they have very clear signals about what's expected of them. So if this type of tax rebate was to come in, then I think that would be well managed. But as I say, it's a big if. I'm not giving anything away in the manifesto, and I don't have views about what's going to be in it. I know that what we do have in there will support Kiwi households.
Sorry, so just to get this right, Cabinet have made decisions around not just tax policy but your manifesto. The caucus, the Labour Party caucus have approved it or have signed it off as well?
I'm not going to go into our processes. They're always confidential. But I'm also not going to give away what's in the manifesto. I'm excited about what we're going to be sharing with the public imminently. Okay, all right. So I assume, therefore, if you know what's in it, then it obviously has been through your caucus. One of the people who wasn't very happy a couple of weeks ago was David Parker, and he resigned as Revenue Minister over the issues that you've raised of capital gains tax and a wealth tax. Should he have stayed on, do you think? I mean, you are allowed to differ, which is cool, but do you think it would have been good for him to keep on as Revenue Minister? I'm not going to speak for David Parker. He has expressed where he thinks he can best serve our party and our constituents, and I fully support that.
Okay. When you talk about a capital gains tax and wealth tax, which I know that you like, and which is fair enough, and a number of people, irrespective of their political hue, like the idea of a capital gains tax as well. They think that's the one thing missing from the New Zealand equation. If you get into power again, though, Ingrid, I would assume it comes back onto the agenda, because you've got political parties, your two allies, which are the Greens and the Maori Party, Te Pāti Māori, who would love that to occur. If the economic conditions in New Zealand change over the next 3 years, and you would rather hope that they would, then surely that's back on the agenda, isn't it?
Not if you've got a Prime Minister who's made it very clear that during his term in office he won't be looking at those interventions. So I think people trust Chris Hipkins. He's made his position clear. They can trust that that's something he won't do while he's in that position, and we fully back that. Okay, well that's okay. So that's a bottom line for you, is it? Right, that's it. It's off the until 2025 or 2026. No, because if the Prime Minister stayed on longer, it would be off the agenda for longer. And it is a captain's call. We support him. He's a trusted leader, and he's made it clear that the time is not now or in the foreseeable future for him. And while he's Prime Minister, we back that. Okay, so if he wasn't Prime Minister, you'd be in boots and all. Look, I've made it clear that my views are I have always supported it. I would support it. I don't see any time in the foreseeable future where Chris Hipkins won't be our leader. I think we're going to win this election, and I think he's going to stay on as our leader. And while that happens, I fully support his decisions around what is the best way to get tax fairness for New Zealanders. No, that's very loyal of you. Very good on you. The next part I'm interested in is you would have seen the latest polls that Winston Peters and New Zealand First are at 4%. Do you expect them to feature on election night in terms of being in Parliament? I have no idea, and to be honest, I'm not focused on that. I'm not even thinking about that. I'm thinking about getting out door knocking and phone calling and making sure that Labour gets in to lead a left-leaning government. All right, okay. And finally, Ingrid, if you're not going to give away when the manifesto is, but one assumes it's imminent, are there any particular policies that you're looking forward to releasing other than the tax policy? I am looking forward to releasing the whole manifesto, actually, because it has been through a lot of discussion, a lot of fine-tuning, and it is very focused on making a difference for Kiwi households. We know that Kiwi households are doing it tough, and that our focus needs to be on what we can do to make it easier for them. That's what people are going to see in the manifesto, and I can't wait to campaign on it. When you release the manifesto, this is what's going to happen if you get elected. It's not going to be something you do prior to the election. Is that correct? Sorry, can you say that again, Michael? When you're releasing the manifesto, this is, if Labour get re-elected, this is what we will do, and presumably there'll be a timescale as to when you'll do it. You're not planning to do anything prior to the election to ease the cost of living burden over the next 72 days or whatever? Oh, look, I can't speak for the executive, but I can repeat what I've heard in the House when ministers have been asked about various policies, particularly around taxation, for example, that there are no imminent government policies on taxation, that what the Labour Party does in its manifesto is separate from what the executive does. Yep. So I'm not expecting anything, but I cannot speak for the government because I'm not a member of Cabinet and I don't know what they've got planned. If I would hazard a guess, I'd say we've got 3 sitting weeks left. People are already gearing up and in campaign mode, and I don't imagine there would be anything out of the ordinary apart from business as usual, but this is politics, and as Greg O'Connor said, a week's a long time in politics, sure, so your guess is as good as mine. Yeah. And finally, is there anything that you personally, apart from the manifesto, think that hasn't been covered properly by the media over the last week that you're thinking, that's unfair, we should get some credit for that, we're not? Look, we've had the nurses settle, the teachers look like they might settle, they've had a record offer. We've got a caucus that, despite difficult polling, has been very disciplined and very supportive behind our leader, even when it has been difficult news for some members. I think that shows that we've got a strong team and we've got a team that is ready to go out and fight.
All right, Ingrid, thank you very much. I hope you have a great weekend. I look forward to catching up with you next week.
You too, Michael.
Okay, see you later. All right, that is Ingrid Leary, the Member of Parliament, Labour MP for Tairi. You will have some views on what Ingrid has said. Listen, for anybody who listened to that particular interview, we know that the Labour Party will be releasing a promise to remove GST from fresh fruit and vegetables in the next week or so. All right, as part of the manifesto. We know that it will not be happening prior to the election. So that's the other thing I would take from that particular interview. It'll happen if you elect Labour. And we know also that they will say that the Grocery Commissioner, recently named, will be provided with the responsibility of ensuring that that 15% saving on fresh fruit and vegetables does not transfer itself to the corporate profit structure of the two major supermarket chains in this country. Okay, so whether you think that's a good idea or not, whether you think that's practical or not, whether you or not think that gamekeeper role that the Grocery Commissioner, the warden role that the Grocery Commissioner is going to play will be effective or not, I think that from what I've just listened to, reading between the lines is pretty bloody obvious. And I'd be interested in your reaction to that and whether or not it will or it will not change your views as to how New Zealand votes in 72 days.